Lecture 7, The American Dream Overseas. The automobile's transformation of North America is significant in and of itself, but referring back to the first lecture of the course, we want to reframe the significance of automobility in a global context. You will recall that for most of human history, the population of humans lay below about 10 million people. And then in the last few thousand years, it shot up dramatically in the context of historical time. Suddenly it went up to 1 billion people around the time of the Industrial Revolution. And we stretched the graph here in order to be able to notice changes. So we compressed the 10,000 years BC into a much smaller part of the graph. And so this is a distortion. We're stretching it out very quickly, much more quickly, in a matter of 130 years, shot up to 2 billion around 1925. We added a third billion in the 35 or so years up to 1960. So here we are at 3 billion. And then hold on to your hats, because here we go. About every 14 years or so, we add another billion people, and it seems like we are going to quickly smother the planet in humanity until the present, at about 7 billion people now. The demographers at the United Nations tell us that don't worry, things are actually scheduled to level off at about 10 billion people somewhere in the middle of this century. And we dodged that bullet. And if we look at the future, this is something like what the world holds for us. So 10 billion people, no problem. We can handle 7 billion, we can handle 10 billion, no problem. Most of those people will, and here's the perspective, we turn the graph to its normal scale, and we see the demographic wall. And so moving forward, we look at that additional 3 billion people we're about to add here, and see that a vast majority of them are in the global south, what we used to call the developing world of Asia and Africa. And here we see the concentrations of population. North America, not much happening there. Europe, some big cities, very concentrated. But the real action is over here in Asia, where you could draw a circle that encompasses India, China, Japan, and Indonesia, and you would basically have enclosed more than half of the global population at present, and the site of the vast majority of future growth are in these cities. And so in that perspective, it starts to matter what happens in the cities of the global south more than any other place. Especially, and you will recall this, if we take our population graph and we look at the environmental impact of consumption and resource depletion and pollution, the waste dumped into the world, it is roughly proportional to income. And as the global income increases, we are looking at a collapse of the system. With or without zombie apocalypse, we will collapse under our own weight, the weight of our own consumption, if the trend continues where these 10 billion humans on the earth increasingly live lifestyles that match the lifestyles of North America. So to the extent that North America currently is the elephant in the room because it has 4% of the global population but consumes 25% of its resources, that is increasingly changing, and this is not a good thing. It's not that we're getting better, it's that everyone else is getting as bad as us. So when Chinese wealth distribution works effectively, and instead of wealthy 1% living like Americans, you get even 10% of Chinese living like Americans, we are suddenly in deep doo-doo. And so we turn our gaze to looking at how automobility and other trappings of North American lifestyle spread to the rest of the world. Here we see a little outpost in the desert that uh, is Dubai, and we used to not really be concerned about Dubai. And this is what it looked like as recently as the 1970s, their first big road. But then things changed very quickly. Why? Not because people wanted to live in Dubai, not because there was a lot of industry in Dubai. It was a new thing, which is a very interesting theme of this lecture and throughout our discussions. And it is the financialization of everything, including the financialization of architecture and urban form. It turns out that Dubai is not an oil producing location. It's a nation state as part of the United Arab Emirates. It is an autonomous sheikhdom, and it gets most of its income traditionally from trade. It's what's called an entrepot. Ships arrive, they unload their goods, and more ships come in and goods are uploaded into those ships. And the big boom for Dubai was the embargo of Iran. So anything coming in and out of Iran illegally passes through Dubai, and they get a great deal of income from that. The other big boom, and this is in a way much bigger, is the financialization of urban form. These buildings are not here because people want to live in Dubai. They're not here because there's a lot of industry and a lot of income. They're not here because it's a great place for corporate headquarters of international corporations. They're here because this is a place that was perceived as having potential for growing investment value. This is an interesting case that was one of the triggers of this. They wanted to build the biggest hotel in the world, the biggest and most expensive and most luxurious. This, for a long time, was the tallest residential structure in the world. It's called the Burj Al Arab. And because this is the Arabian Peninsula, the land of Islam, you can't build a hotel on the peninsula of the land of Islam because it's difficult to host foreigners and then control their personal behavior, especially regarding extramarital sex. And so the island had to be placed off the coast of the Arabian Peninsula and connected to the mainland with a bridge. So technically this is not on the Arabian Peninsula, so we're good. And if you want to visit the lobby of this hotel, you can pay $35 and be driven in a limousine just to see this amazing lobby. I think it's $5,000 a night. The success of this launched a series of offshore projects that are so much larger than the Burj Al Arab that it doesn't even seem to show up at this scale. These are vast luxury housing developments, including one that is a replica of the planet Earth. You can see there the upper right. And so we have these thin strips of sand dredged out of the sea and piled up to be sites for luxury housing, infrastructure connecting luxury hotels, even a subway system. One of the most rapid skyline developments ever. Each of these towers is about the height of the tallest building in Boston, built in order to justify investment more than anything else. All of these condos in the towers and luxury houses on the Palm Islands are sold. And so on paper, it's a huge success. but there aren't many people actually living here. It's really all about the ability to tell a convincing story. And this is how financial mechanisms operate. That if you can tell a convincing story of financial value, you can sell things. And the future value of something is determined by the fact of you having sold it. And so if there is one person willing to purchase something, that establishes the value of that thing and the other commodities like that. And so if you can convincingly tell the story to one person to the point where they will buy it, counting on some significant return in investment or at least a maintenance of value, then you now have the makings of a building boom. And it's actually technically what in economics we call a bubble. There is no actual demand for these condos or these buildings. It is simply an investment strategy that if you can tell people with a lot of money from the global south, where bank accounts are unstable and insecure, the stock market is not very dependable, they need some way to convert this cash into something that will hold its value and maybe even grow its value in the future. And so architecture increasingly is driven by the story that it can support. And it's not that different from what we do in this class. If you can point to a picture of a building and say, this is valuable now, and in 10 years it's going to be much more valuable. And if you can tell that story convincingly, then you've got yourself a source of quite significant wealth, especially if it's a project, the kind of projects we see in Dubai. This leads us to what had been called the Burj Dubai, but when there was a financial collapse, they called in some help from Abu Dhabi nearby, and it's now called the Burj Khalifa. About twice the height of the Empire State Building, so much taller than any other building before that it's not crazy to believe that it would hold the record forever. Well, not so fast. This financialization phenomenon is going global, and we've seen other buildings showing up that threaten to surpass even the Burj Khalifa. And so the spectacular unveiling of this building is part of the process, part of the design process. It's not just the building, it's the spectacle that the building supports. And together, the spectacular architecture and the spectacle associated with the building supports the capacity to tell the story, this is something special. If you have any doubts, take a look at this clip. This is something special. The world has never seen this before. It may never see anything like it again. That all is not just to increase national pride or cultural pride, which of course it does, but more fundamentally, it's there to increase the investment value. This ceremony costs a great deal of money, but it more than paid for itself in its capacity to increase the value of the property of the building, whether or not anyone actually ever occupies it for useful purposes. And this is the big bizarre thing for architects, is we're used to satisfying program. We're used to building buildings that people will use, and we study very carefully the way people use buildings, what their needs are, and supply architecture that supplies those needs. Well, in this case, the needs that are being supplied are financial investment value needs, whether or not it supports activities within it, whether or not it has any use value. The exchange value of the future is what matters. Sometimes use value comes into play in the evaluation of exchange value So yes, it should be competent. It should work for the certain assigned programs, but that is not necessarily the biggest factor. It's not even in some cases, as we see in Dubai, it's not even obvious how it comes into play at all. When multiple years after the opening of a building, it remains empty, but everyone declares it to be a great success. Empty buildings does not interfere with the evaluation that the architecture was successful. Enough of this. Abu Dhabi is engaged in a similar project of promoting investment value through spectacular architecture, which takes us to China, where the rice fields on the eastern side of the Huangpu River, the traditional port of Shanghai, was rapidly developed in the 1990s after Chinese switched towards an open door policy. China, that was humiliated during the Opium Wars against the British in the 19th century, were ready to make a comeback and establish themselves as a global superpower driven by rapid financial growth, the rapid urbanization of its population. We'll talk about this more, I believe. And one of the instruments for driving this was the establishment of Shanghai as a global city, center of financial activity. They did that by developing the rice fields on the east shore of the Huangpu River rapidly into a major skyline financial district. The corporations of the world wanting access to the new demographic boom of consumers in China could do so as long as they signed a long-term lease for land or for office space in the Pudong, this area in color, the Pudong area of Shanghai. Whether they occupied it or not, that was their business, but if they wanted access to the markets of the consumers of China, lease some office space. And so there was an artificial boost to the office demand for this area. Still today, if you want to move to Shanghai, there is inexpensive housing available in the Pudong area because no one wants to live there. And so this is a false supply and demand situation, partially driven by architecture. The symbolic purposes of these skyscrapers was to signal to the world that China was ready for its close-up. The model by which the Chinese are developing is the consumer model provided by North America. If you want to be seen as a winner, focus on the house and the car, as we see in this encapsulation of what it means to be a winner in North America in the late 20th century. John Travolta's house, car isn't enough, you need to get around by airplanes. The motor vehicle ownership rates of the United States versus the rest of the world is measured in vehicles per 1,000 population. And here we see the rapid growth before World War II, before and after World War II, of the automobile ownership rate in the United States. And on it, you can see the location of other nations and their automobile ownership rate. As we saw last week, the United States peaked at around in the high 700 somethings, 780 or so vehicles per thousand, and from there it has dropped. In the meantime, China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, the largest population nations in the world, have all jumped up this scale very rapidly. And we see a collaborating or accompanying development of real estate styles, where this man is a real estate developer, and he decided to sell the image of success as a European cultural statement of what your house looks like. This is actually a multiple unit dwelling with multiple luxury units in it. But any resident here can pull up in a car with their guests and say, "Welcome to my home." And that seems to have a great deal of value. If you're a millionaire in China, this is how you live. And the urbanization of China is creating millionaires at a very rapid clip. Because all of the land was state-owned at one point, there was no real estate market. And suddenly, when you start to buy and sell land, there is an enormous release of money and capital. And some people talk about China as a manufacturing economic boom. I believe that is part of it, but not the whole story. It may not even be half the story. I believe that the biggest contributor to Chinese economic boom, as elsewhere in history, is the rapid creation of value embedded in the land. And that is why the urbanization strategy is so fundamental to the economic expansion of China. You also have a parallel development of what is in effect an interstate highway system very similar to the United States, where you build freeways connecting all the major cities, and this is a parallel creation of land value. And so the automobile and the suburban house and the suburban lifestyle, night golfing in China, the development of ring roads, as the Japanese would love to see happen in every city in the world as a automobile sales strategy. And when the traffic gets bad, as we see in these images, we sell them, after selling cars and freeway systems to these countries, we can now sell them trains and rapid transit systems. And so the internet is filled with epic traffic jam pictures, many of these from China. There's a good one coming up. There, now we're talking. And this is increasingly the reality of the cities of the global south. You would be tempted to believe that it's a clear sign of economic success that everybody drives. Everybody's got cars. They must be in the middle class. Look at these buildings. They're just like American cities. Great economic success. Or is it? Not so fast here. In these countries, these traffic jams are the result of something like 5% of the national population having an automobile. You might get up to 50 or even 100 cars per 1,000 people, and this is already the situation. There is no way for automobility to be a logical system, a viable system for moving anywhere close to even a quarter of the population of these places. So it will never become a place like the United States. It will always have to have a significant component of mass transportation. One of the more interesting examples is provided by Indonesia and the city of Jakarta, where in the 1980s they deregulated the banks. The banks made bank loans for land development. They did the same thing as in China, where they had no real estate market. Land had no exchange value. It had use value. But the rapid development of speculative land financial arrangements led to very quick development of what they called new towns, but were basically what we would call subdivisions. These subdivisions were marketed in campaigns like this, promoting imagery coming directly off TV. This is not in California, this is in Jakarta. And every different neighborhood within the gated community had its own theme. French, the Colosseum is adapted here with the Acropolis inside. Things are mixed together. freely as a marketing scheme. And so the study of the history of architecture comes in very handy if you are an architect in Asia, because now you can make replicas of the historic buildings that you're familiar with as part of the real estate development scheme. I'm just showing these images. The story is told more completely in the reading.